Hello again, Michael Ware with IFC's Warrior Wednesday. I say this every time because every time it's true. I have a special guest today, Zach Lahn. He's running for Iowa governor here. We may look back at some point, Zach, at this, if you're governor, and say, hey, remember when? So this is going to be a lot of fun. And for everybody's edification, if you haven't seen it, Zach was kind enough to come on with all the other gubernatorial candidates on what we call our candidate files and weigh in on the Second Amendment specifically and some of our marquee items. So we'll link to that so you guys have that. Welcome, Zach. It's glad to have you.
Thanks for having me back.
This is great. Okay, so I want to get the tickers run across the bottom of the screen here. I'll get this out of the way right now. We want people to navigate to the Iowa Firearms Coalition, and you can type Iowa FC in your browser, navigate there. You're going to need to be able to go to, I'll have the screen ready to broadcast here in a second. And that's Zach Lahn. And for people watching, you probably know this. For people listening, probably too. But Lahn is spelled L-A-H-N. So let's not make that mistake. So Zach, L-A-H-N, type that in your browser, you can get there. We want folks to go to iowafc.org and check out our trusted partners. Those people who are offering you discounts as perks of membership are truly who keep this program, Warrior Wednesday, going. Their funding makes this possible. We appreciate that. So I have some rapid fire questions I want to start with, and then we'll get into the meat of things, okay?
Great.
Coffee or energy drinks?
I'm a coffee guy. I got it right here.
Okay. Favorite Iowa town besides your own?
Oh, favorite Iowa town besides my own. Well, gosh, that's actually a tough one. I like Northeast Iowa because there's trout fishing and things like that. So I'd probably pick one up there.
All right. Okay. If you ended up saying something like Decorah, whatever else, I mean that's a pretty common one for people. It's beautiful up in that area. Nice town. Yeah. So, but I mean, how long have you been a Belle Plaine guy?
Oh, well, I've been, we bought the farm in 2013, lived here from 2013 to 2018, moved back in 2023. Prior to that, I was Ankeny for a while, and then I grew up in Northwest Iowa, which is, just north of Sioux City. So, I got to say, I also, as a kid, like my favorite town in Iowa is probably Okoboji. I go to Arnold's Park with Grandma and Grandpa. Those are my favorite places.
All right. My daughter's considering going to Northwestern up in Orange City. So I don't spend a lot of time up there, but I have been quite a bit recently. It looks like a really nice community.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Favorite Iowa restaurant?
Favorite Iowa restaurant? Gosh, you're asking me the tough ones that I'm taking a hard stance on here. I got to think about. I'll probably, I'm going to just go with the hometown place. There's the Firebox on Main Street in Belle Plaine, the barbecue spot. I like that place a lot.
I'll have to go over there and check it out. That sounds fun. Favorite fair food?
Well, I like the big turkey leg. That's one of my favorites I have every year. So I'll pick that one.
All right. Last movie you watched?
The last Young Washington with the kids. Actually, it's playing at the King Theater in Belle Plaine this weekend at our theater. So $5 tickets for anybody who wants to watch it.
Fantastic. All right. Favorite president?
I'm going to go with maybe a bit of a different response here than some. Going back a ways, Theodore Roosevelt. I really enjoy his thoughts on conservation, hunting, on the environment, all of that, and also on being an American. Why it's so important.
Yeah, he's an easy guy to relate to if you're an outdoor type or I guess you might say a man's man, so to speak. He's an easy guy to come alongside. Most underrated Iowa attraction.
Most underrated Iowa attraction. How about this? I think that people sometimes underrate how good the fishing is in Iowa. We have a lot of good fishing spots here, and I grew up doing that with my grandpa. And I do it with my own kids now. And so I know people talk about Iowa hunting a lot, and that's great. But I also think we have a lot of great fishing spots.
Let's see. What was my next one I had written down? Favorite firearm you've owned or shot?
If I should, my 6.5 Creedmoor. That's probably my favorite one.
Okay. All right. Car or truck?
Truck.
Bonus question. What's one thing that's always in it?
I don't know if I can say. Actually, how about this? This will be a different one. That's always been in it for years. I have this picture that's in the center console, and it's of my grandpa in his first airplane that I found. I just always have kept it in the car. For some reason, it's always been in my truck. There's also other things in the truck that I won't talk about here, although your listeners would like that a lot, but don't want to give away my secrets.
Yeah. Well, you can default to something like fire extinguisher. Everybody leads with that one. Yeah. Okay. If you had one free Saturday, this is the last rapid fire question. If you had one free Saturday, how would you spend it, Zach?
With my kids, probably right here on the farm. That's what I do. It's like to spend time with them, and they love being out here. So I don't have a lot of free Saturdays anymore, which I signed up for. But yes, that's what I'd be doing.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you for those. That was a little bit of fun.
Those are the hard ones. I was caught off guard because, I've been traveling so much around the state. If you had asked me a year ago, where's your favorite place in Iowa, I probably had at the top of my head. Now I'm thinking about, gosh, think of all the places I've been that I've never been to in Iowa.
Well, when you're on this kind of extensive campaign, you're seeing the nooks and crannies. Now, as a guy who used to travel as a salesperson across Iowa, you end up finding these little towns with great little restaurants and interesting little attractions and all these fun things that you didn't know about that you don't find advertised or on a map, or they don't have the budget to prominently display what they've got. And you find all these hidden gems and you're like, man, this is the kind of thing that I'm glad that I happened through and experienced. Those are great.
Yeah, and then when we get off this call, I'm immediately going to think of 2 or 3 places I wish I would have talked about specifically, because there's awesome places. There's the kids love, some of the soda fountains and candy shops we find. Mm-hmm. And then, I'll tell you, one of the places I've been, and I don't want to belabor this, but Clear Lake. I had not really spent a lot of time up there. It's a really neat town. I mean, they've got some cool stuff for the kids. It's very family friendly. It's really neat.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that kind of leads into a question that I made a note here that I want to talk with you about. I'll read it off just as I wrote it here. Who was Zach Lahn when there isn't a campaign?
Yeah, well, I'm a dad and a husband. That's most of what I spend my time on, truly. I think we have 7 kids. Oldest is 14, youngest is 2. And so most of the time that I'm spending is trying to figure out how can I, make sure I'm giving enough time and attention to each of the kids in the proper place that they're in development in their life right now, because they each need something from me. I went to bed last night at about 11 o'clock, and I was thinking about one of my daughters and some one piece of academic things that she wants to work on, and how can I find the time to make sure I'm working on that with her. But, also a student of history. I love reading about Iowa's history, about the history of America, about these places that our families have come from. And then maybe finally, to round that out, I think there's something along the lines of God's put something on my heart that I like to restore things. So I've been working on our family farm. The theater in Belle Plaine is something that was really near and dear to my heart still is. And some of the buildings there that we'd like to work on. And so that's probably where you'd find me if you were looking and I wasn't running for governor.
Well, you are running for governor. I'm sharing that screen now so that people can see that. It should be coming through here in just 1 second. There we go. So people can go to your website and learn a little bit about you. If they don't know about your race, I would find it hard to believe at this point that they don't know what's going on or why. But that's ZACHLAHN. So ZachLahn.com. What's something that we need to know about that people may not know about you or this race? Why don't you fill us in on what your thoughts are?
Yeah, I think what's been really unique about our campaign is the approach we've taken to running for governor and making sure that it's very focused on the Iowa issues. I think a lot of times we can get really heavily focused on DC issues, of which we have very little to no control over in the seat that I am running for. But there are a lot of things on the Iowa side that we can be focused on to make life better. And that's, if you look at our campaign, our website, Put Iowa First, you think that's a slogan, but really it's actually just a change in the way we're thinking about things and saying that the economy, the government of Iowa needs to be focused on making life better for the people of Iowa. And that's opposed to, how for a very long time in many places, in many states, large corporations, lobbyists, special interests have just had so much control over the government, and people have seen it. And so that when somebody comes in and starts talking a bit differently about this, about, talking about data centers and saying they have to pay their fair share or don't be here, or talking about the cancer crisis and saying the University of Iowa should be focused on, working to solve this cancer crisis within the state of Iowa, because it's a state-based university. And instead of focusing on global problems, focus on the local problems we have right here. It's just a different way of thinking. And one final example of that would be, for a long time, we've been giving tax incentives to large multinational companies to put a branch of their office here in Iowa. And oftentimes those companies are competing against Iowa's homegrown businesses who are not getting the same incentives. And so my take on that is we're going to invest in Iowa's homegrown businesses first. And that's just the idea of putting Iowa first. And there's so many ways we can be thinking about it. But that's the lens through which I view, governing in the state of Iowa and being the next governor.
Well, in that vein, I think that this is a fair question. Maybe you can answer it the way that I'm looking for an answer. Was there a single catalyst or something that made you say, hey, I'd like to see a different kind of leadership, or I want to see leadership in the future of Iowa look like this? I mean, was there something that was that spark that made you say, this needs to change, or I want to do this, or what was it?
Well, I think what I just talked about, the Iowa First, that it's in that same vein, but I'll just tell you, in rural Iowa, I've been watching for many years as there's been a hollowing out happening. And, obviously, I care both about rural and urban areas in the state of Iowa, but, we're not going to restore the promise and make Iowa what it can be without our rural communities if they continue to be hollowed out and dying off. And so I've watched as my neighbors have been, subject to price controls from very large agricultural conglomerates who have consolidated the market so much that they have no more choice. There's no competition in the market, and they are complete price takers. They have no say over setting any sort of price for their product. And so what's happened is there's just continued to be this extraction from our rural communities. And then if we look at other things that I've talked about, the same can go when we're talking about data centers, wind, solar, all of these things that have been coming into these areas. And also, this extraction extends even further than that. Look at, we're number 4 in the nation for our kids leaving the state. If there's one thing that we need to be focused on fixing, there's all sorts of political issues, all regulations, I get that. But if there's a metric we're going to track on the long-term prosperity of Iowa, it's, are Iowa's kids staying or leaving? And the reason is, it doesn't matter what industry I'm talking to. They're all saying, we need more people. We need more people. But on the deeper cultural side, we want to pass on our values. We want to pass on the culture that was handed to us and built for us and maintain the heritage that we have. That happens when we keep our families close-knit and we have them here. And so that's probably the number one metric I'm going to be tracking is, are Iowa's kids staying or leaving? And then, that will happen if we're saving our family farms, making our education better, and solving the cancer crisis in the state. The other 3 issues I'm talking about.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I agree. I've got, I go to church with large, it's a small church, there, I don't know, maybe 100 folks in the pews, 80 people in the pews on the average Sunday, right? And a lot of these people are friends and neighbors, so to speak, that are in close proximity to where I live. I live on a hobby farm outside of Baxter, okay? And so I'll go to church and I'll visit with my buddy John and some of these guys. And these people work hard, Zach. I mean, hard. I mean, these families, they work their farm together. I mean, they've got beans, corn. They've got red Angus. If I said black, John would have a fit. They have red Angus, and they raise a lot of hogs. But I mean, it's just super tough to see the look on his face to put in all these hours with these hogs and then watch them go off to market and know that it's essentially vertically integrated. He's got no choices. He can't choose where he sells. He can't choose. He can't shop by price. They dictate to him how this is going to work. And he either goes along for the ride or he gets out of the business. That's a tough thing to be part of in terms of your psyche, but it's also tough when you put so many hours and so much passion into taking good care of these animals, this livestock, and then say, here's your 7 cents. Thanks for playing.
Michael, I would just say the word you use there, it's tough on the psyche. You're right. What it does is it kind of strips the spirit out of it, where you're more disconnected from what's actually happening. You're connected to the raising and all of that piece of it, but then you're subject to someone or something else in the market. And by the way, that's not what it's intended to be.
Right.
Like monopolies are failures of the free market. And if we look all over the place, what we're seeing is consolidation after consolidation in so many industries, and we've been asleep at the wheel. But the good news is this is reaching a fever pitch in many places. They're just looking for somebody to take the first arrows, file the first suits, or join the suits that are already out there to start making the markets fair and competitive again. Don't get me wrong, it's a big deal, and it will take a lot of effort, but it has to start somewhere. And in the agriculture market, my belief is that it should start in Iowa.
Well, I don't disagree with that. I don't know. Primarily, when we bring guests on here, we talk Second Amendment centric and whatever else. And I do want to get your opinion on what those words mean. They were the Second Amendment, for the reason, not the first. Of course, we know what that is. But I wanted to see what you thought about that at some point. We can hop into that at any time that you'd like. But the reality is, I'm looking forward and saying, I wonder what success looks like with a Zach Lane governorship 4 years afterwards. So let's say that you win your election bid, you become the governor of Iowa, and you're blessed with 4 years that are uninterrupted, by not a lot of calamity, but you have 4 years. What do things look like after that 4 years opposed to now?
Gosh, that's a great question. What I look at, or what are some of the foundational issues that I can work on to shift? Mm-hmm. And it goes back to the Iowa First message. But I would say the metric I'm tracking, and if I'm elected for 4 years, I hope I can be elected for another 4 years, because this is a long-term problem to shift, especially when we're talking about the number one metric being, are we keeping our kids in the state or are they leaving? So I would like to see us over 4 years add a significant amount of family farms. I would like to see our public education and education in general come from number 27 in the nation to at least the top 10 in the first term. I would like to see that. And then I would like to see us make meaningful progress on reducing the rate of rise of cancer in our state. So, those are all, if I was in the schools that I've helped run, the kids set what they call SMART goals, or specific, measurable, actionable, time relevant, and I say tough. Other people say time bound. I just like to say tough. And so as I would get closer to being the governor, I would actually be putting together these, okay, what's my timeline on each one of these issues? How do I measure it properly? But how do we get to some of these results? I'll say, when we're looking at one, keeping our kids here, two, saving family farms, those two things actually are quite intertwined. Mm-hmm. And what I'm looking at is, what are opportunities in the agriculture industry that I can use to bring vibrancy back and bring opportunity in markets back. So one of the things I've talked a lot about since the beginning of this campaign is that we have the best farmland in the world. We import 95% of our food. And so, look, I can't change that. I can't flip that on its head myself. What I can do is find the markets that we can start to work in and unburden those. So for instance, I'd like to see a time when 80% of the food served in our public schools is grown on farms in Iowa. And I've actually met with Secretary Rollins already about this. There's one regulation she can change to open it up so I can help pass this in Iowa. I would like to see that happen. That will get people off the sidelines, like your friend, to see more opportunity in agriculture, not just the struggle in agriculture, but the opportunity to create something for their kids so the young people want to stay and say, oh gosh, there's something more I can do here. And if I was running the farm, I would also do this and this to add more income. And then you have a market that you can actually sell to that's local, so you're serving Iowa's kids. Changes like that, while seeming maybe simple of an idea, they're complex, but they would also result in a lot of vibrancy coming back to rural areas because people would see opportunity, and we're creating new markets. I think it's a huge opportunity. In education, I'd like to see innovation zones where superintendents can be unburdened by state and federal regulations, which the governor can unilaterally do. and allow them to create concurrent paths, even within their public schools, where parents can opt in to a different model of education. Ones that have more freedom for the teacher, more freedom for the student, more flexibility in the time and how it's used within the classroom day. Because we're seeing for decades that there's a lot of people, especially young boys, who are told they don't fit into a system. And then when they don't fit in, they're medicated very often. And then we see just the spirit diminished within them. But actually, the world needs a lot of what they have to offer. And so the system just doesn't recognize it. I know many people, including myself, that was one of those kids. And so they're near and dear to my heart. So as we can start to move away from these just traditional models where it's a teacher in front of the classroom and there's more flexibility, which these are not experiments. They're operating very well across the country. We'll serve more students in a much better way, and we'll have much greater outcomes. One of the outcomes I tell people, as I was talking to a woman who does data in education yesterday.
Okay.
I said, here's one of the metrics we tracked in our schools was student satisfaction. Do kids like coming to school? And in our schools, they loved coming to school. Oftentimes they wouldn't want to leave school, even if they were going to be going to do something fun with the family. So those are some of the things I'm looking at. But at the end of it, my goal is that we have more of Iowa's kids choosing to stay in Iowa or come back home. We're increasing the number of family farms, and we are making our public education in the top 10 within the first term. And then finally would be meaningful work to lower the rate of new cancer in the state. Eventually, we want to be in parity with states that have very average rates or lower. But in the first term, we want to lower the rate of new cancer significantly.
Well, I'm picking up on what you're laying down. I have my son is 12, and I think that you could adequately say that he has a busy mind. That's how I describe it, right? But this is not a swipe at our local public school teachers where he's gone. He's been homeschooled for a little while. We did that, and I helped him in these younger years, and then he's in public school. And I tell you what, most of the teachers that I have worked with personally are fabulous. They are dedicated people. I love them, and I mean that in every sense of philia. I do. But I'll say this, every now and then my wife and I will become under the impression, well, this pup can't seem to concentrate. And we were talking about that the other day, and it dawned on me. I'm like, you know what? If I put a video game in front of him, or he doesn't, well, he's not really allowed to play those. But if I put this train simulator or whatever else on a phone app and handed it to him, he would stare at that until the phone was almost on fire because it was burning the battery so bad, right? So he can concentrate. He will focus. I just haven't found the right ways to make that work, or found the right ways to make it work well yet. But Zach, that's on me. I'm his dad. My wife is his mom. It's our job primarily to make sure that this is getting done and done well. Yes, we use the public school as a partner, but the truth of the matter is it's on me. So I need to figure out how to do that. And I'll be honest with you, I haven't been able to decipher exactly what that looks like yet, but I want to. And as you said, it may not be in a traditional model.
Yeah. And, that I would just say what you said there is exactly right. As a mom and dad, you are the ones who are supposed to know the most about your children, what will help them succeed in different environments. And sometimes it is the environment that is the problem. We have to be willing to accept that because, look, education hasn't changed from a delivery standpoint in 120 years, or at least 120 years. And there are models of school out there that do give young kids far more freedom. And they find that if they have more choice over what they're working on within guardrails, so it's not like you're playing video games at school, but you can set a little bit of your schedule in the morning, which is what our schools did. You had a block of time, about 3 hours every morning for core skills, but you met with a mentor. Elementary kids met with a mentor from the high school on Mondays to set out what was their priority for the week. Then they get to choose what they're working on during the week from that menu of items. And even just that option of more choice in self-directed learning allows kids to feel like they have more agency and control. And when they get to choose what they're working on, oftentimes they feel far more bought into it. And that sometimes that can be all it takes. There is some gamification. Look, our schools, I think on average, a kid might use a computer for about 45 minutes a day, something like that. It's primarily for things like computational math, because a computer is a pretty darn good way to deliver that, like doing math problems. And some of these programs even gamify it. So it's like they have, just like a kind of like a video game to say, you're leveling up, you're earning these rewards or whatever it might be. And they're finding it fun to learn math because it's part of a game. I'm okay with that. I actually really like that. When it comes to just reading a book, we want to read physical books, have a book in your hand. But the key that we have found throughout years is what somebody I followed for a while named Naval, he says, read what you love until you love to read. So in our schools, if you start off with a comic book, like an actual, that's great. If it's something that you want to learn to read, it's going to develop a love of reading for you. It's great. That's the type of flexibility that so many of these alternative type of schools have, where they're all going to the same goal of, being well-rounded kids, good character, good understanding of civics, all of this. But at the same time, we're finding different pathways to learn the academic part of it, because every kid is different. Yeah. So you as a parent know that, and it might be a different environment.
You are coming off to me. You're striking me as the kind of guy who is listening when people are talking rather than waiting for the next opportunity to speak. I appreciate that. So I'm curious, because it would be natural to arrive at some sort of conclusion that was different than from your own through conversation, because that's really what we're doing here. I think maybe it was Jordan Peterson. I listened to a lecture of his, and he was talking about how people think. I fancy myself a smart guy, Zach, but the reality is I'm not that smart. So I can't sit back, cross my arms, and look at this chalkboard with this, this monumental problem, whether it's mathematics, a question of logic, whatever else. I'm not often able to look at those things that nobody else has figured out, stare at them and say, I see this. That's not what I'm able to do. There are a handful of people in history who were able to do those things. I'm not among them. But what we do in terms of thinking is you and I talk. We listen to one another, or you and I listen or watch a program or listen to a lecture or hear a sermon, whatever it may be. If you're sitting in the front row pew on Sunday, whatever it may be. But that's part of thinking. And so when you and I do this, sometimes we come away with different ideas than we went in with. And some of them we land on with great conviction. So in that vein, I'm curious, describe for me a time that you ended up coming away from a conversation with a completely different idea and belief than when you went in with.
Oh, man. Well, can I give a little background on what you just said, too?
Yeah, man. That's what this is. Tell us what's on your mind.
Well, because what you just said is exactly right. And, many people have not been trained on how to think. And I'm not saying I'm the expert, but it's not just as if you hear something and then you automatically know how to discern that. It really is a process of sharpening and understanding, is this the right direction? Is this true or not? Part of the problem in politics today, by the way, is that so many people will see a TV ad and just believe it. They just believe it. And that's not a critical thinking exercise. And so then you'll find people who actually do understand. They say, here's something, then they say, okay, I'm going to go find out what the other side says, and we're going to bring it together. In our schools that we've started, they're very Socratic in nature. I've probably led over 1,000 Socratic discussions myself, which are just the idea of, honestly training kids how to think. And so what it would be is we would start each day in the morning. So, traditional school, the bell rings, you're in a desk, something like that. At our school, there's it's, I don't remember, it's 9 a.m. or you're in the Socratic circle starting at age seven, all the way up through high school. And then you have a guy.
Whoa. You need to tell people what the Socratic method is. Where you and I are making the assumption that they know what that is. So quickly, tell them what Socratic method is.
I'll talk about that. It'll be a part of this. So they'll be in a circle, and there's a guide or a facilitator of the Socratic discussion. And so what that looks like is, in our schools, they're bringing the students a dilemma, basically. And so, we'll start with a story, basically to put them in the shoes of a hero that has a really tough decision to make. And then we will, a good facilitator provide an A-B option, and both could be seen as very feasible and viable. And so it's that tension there that helps make these discussions. And then what we do is we ask the first A-B question, and oftentimes the group is split. And then they discuss and debate it between each other. And the facilitator's job is not to put in place their opinion. The facilitator's job, in our view, is to help if the discussion becomes too one-sided. And what we do, we've done these in middle school and high school on gun control. Mm-hmm. And they're actually really interesting because, a lot of times people have not thought about the other side of the discussion whatsoever. And so it's really interesting to hear because, the younger you are, it can be that there might be more of the emotion versus the logic of the constitutional protections or something like that. And then so if it gets too far in one direction, the job of the facilitator is to add a question to bring it back to the middle. And part of the beauty of a Socratic discussion is recognizing that there's a tension at play and you do need to make a choice. It's not in the middle gray area. Life is oftentimes a yes or a no. Governing is a yes or a no. You're going to sign this or vote on this legislation or not. You're going to veto this legislation or not. How do you make that decision? Especially when you can see that, okay, the other side, they do have good arguments, but what logic am I using to make this decision? And so we started those out. We do those every single day. They still do them across our schools. And then they do it in the afternoon as well. And part of the idea I like to say is we're putting them in the shoes of a hero, having to make a tough decision. Because in life, we say that every child who walks through our doors is a hero on a journey to find their calling and change the world. Mm-hmm. And so you're going to have to make these decisions. So, in terms of thinking in that regard, I would say this. I have had, I'll just get really personal with you on these. Even running for governor, there's been many, many times where I will wake up and think, I have 7 kids. I am, I have spent so much time just setting life up to be their father, be present, make sure they know I'm there, I love them. And now I'm, in this race for governor, which puts me on the road all the time. And so often the kids are not used to that so much, and I bring them with me as much as I possibly can just to make sure we're spending time together. But this is something my wife has had to really impress on me, is that, we have a mission in life, and we have more than one mission, of course, but, God can put us in a place for a time and can, reorganize some of the what the day looks like and what the priorities look like. And, running for governor is likely one of the top aims you could aim at, in our life here. It's a very consequential position. Mm-hmm. Now, it's not more important than me being a dad, but I can be hard on myself because that has been such a big part of my identity, is being a father who is overly present, just to say, hey, I want to be engaged and involved in so much. And often on the campaign trail, I'll tell stories of my great-great-great-grandfather, Hans Schlunz, who's buried about 1.5 miles from here. He came from Germany in about 1850, and in about 10 years later, he joined the Civil War, and he didn't have to. And I often go back to that and say, he could have stayed in his home around his family where it was safe and farmed, but instead, for some reason, which I wish I could talk to him about, I really wish I could, he said, this is a part of my duty. And I am going to go and protect these values, protect the culture, protect the way of life that I just came here for. And he left his kids and his wife to go off to this foreign land when he didn't have to. He was one of the 10,000 that signed up when Governor Kirkwood was looking for 750. Yep. And so that's something that I've had to really, think critically and have my mind changed about my mission in many ways. It's not an either or, it's a both. I love being a father, but there's more than one way to accomplish that goal, because ultimately my mission here is for my grandkids. And I know people might say that. I actually mean it, because I don't need to be out doing this.
Yeah.
I could be on the farm. I could be working in town, have a pretty good life. But I really actually believe I can make a difference for my grandkids. And so that's something where I've had to change my thinking and change my mind to understand that it's not a one or the other. And, if I'm doing this, I'm being not present. The kids understand, they love what we're doing. Yes, of course, I'm using a lot more FaceTime than I used to. But at the same time, they're asking me about the campaign all the time. They're so interested in it. And I get to show them what it looks like to be on a big mission.
Well, when you were talking about, what was the great-great-great-grandfather's name?
Hans Schlentz.
Okay, I'll just say Hans. How about that?
Yeah.
Okay. So great-great-great-grandpappy Hans, maybe what was going through his mind was how I look at the first portion of the Second Amendment. When people get the shall not be infringed part, well, actually, apparently about a third of Americans don't understand what that means. Most do. And of that majority of those people do understand it in context. Now, as I said, the shall not be infringed part is pretty straightforward. But what precedes that, when they talk about things that are necessary, right? So if you're going to enjoy the Second Amendment, it's necessary to be prepared for this. So, well-regulated means well-practiced. So that means we need to be trained up and whatever else. Now, none of these items in any way I can tell are conditional. You must do this in order to have this. But if you want to keep your freedom, if you don't want tyranny, you don't want all these other things, then you need to be practiced and ready. You need to have a firearm and be able to use it. And the ability to come before a nation that needs it, a neighbor, come to your own aid. So it's not conditional, Zach, not in my estimation, but it's close, because I think it's kind of like what we see in the good book, what we see in the gospel. These are ought statements. There are some that you see in there, you shall do this. God marches out, what is it, Exodus 20? These are my 10 intolerances. Yep. These are the 10 things that you're going to do or not do. You know what I mean?
Yep.
That's very straightforward. But the majority of those things in the good book are ought statements. This is what you ought to do. This is how you should carry yourself. This is what I expect. Here's your calling. You know what I mean? I see the Second Amendment like that. And maybe Hans was thinking about that. Maybe it was, listen, if I'm going to enjoy this, if my future generations, my friends and neighbors, my total strangers are going to enjoy this, I must do this or be prepared to do this for them, for myself. And it's an important concept to consider and understand.
Yeah. And by the way, look, I understand the Civil War was a major, major event. I mean, one of the biggest on the grounds of the United States ever. Actually, the biggest, right? But that being said, that same spirit can translate to doing something like I'm doing, where it's that I don't have to, but I ought to be doing this. I must do this if I want to protect what I believe in. It comes to a point where, you win the primary like I did. And now you realize, I tell this story about James Garfield after he, basically accidentally won the nomination for president in 1880 because they couldn't pick between Sherman, Ulysses S. Grant at the convention, and they kept balloting. I think it was after 36 ballots. He was there to speak for somebody else in the beginning. Somebody said after ballot 30, I think it was, we want Garfield, and he said, I don't want this. And 6 ballots later, he was the nominee. And then his words were something along the lines of, I don't remember the exact quote, but this is not a prize to be won, but a responsibility to be born.
Yeah.
And so I think, with the winning of the primary, because the primary is the testing of ideas, and gaining the trust of the people. And they say, this is who we want to go represent us in this battle to win the governorship. And the winning of a primary, what happened there was it became a distinct duty that's owed to the people to go and protect our way of life. And that is a must protect. And that's what's at stake here, truly. I mean, it is, it is very, well, I don't think it could be put any more serious than we already have, because
Mhm.
it is a very big battle that we are fighting in our state and in our country. And ultimately, I believe it's a battle for truth. We have people running for office across the country, especially on the left, that aren't admitting that they're a part of the radical left, but they are. I mean, look, you've talked to my opponent, and I know on one of the questions he answered for you, he said something along the lines of, he agrees with your position, but he wants to understand what it would do to insurance rates. I think anybody that would put insurance rates above a constitutional protection isn't a friend of gun owners. Is it that's or isn't a friend of the Second Amendment? Look, we have to understand, when there's a shall not be infringed, that the founders are very specific on the words that they used. They were very precise in their speech. There were many, many drafts of what they were doing, and crossouts and deletions and additions. And it was a labor to get to this, in a debate. It was, like we just talked about a minute ago, it was really a deep discussion and debate. And so when they said shall not be infringed, and they understood that, well, first off, the Second Amendment had nothing to do with hunting whatsoever. It was about keeping a tyrannical government at bay. They put it into the Declaration of Independence about the tree of liberty being watered with the blood of patriots. Like, they knew what they were talking about. And so if you don't understand the foundations of these things and where this comes from, then you'll never get the policy right. It's what I talk about, Michael, in my campaign. I'm not running for office because of policy. I'm running because of culture. And if you don't get the culture right, you won't get the policy right. But if you understand our culture, where we came from, the battles that we had to fight, that my ancestors and yours fought to give us what we have here, you'll understand it's a very easy decision, even if sometimes it's not a popular decision. It's just, yeah.
Well, you're right about all that. I'm liking what I'm hearing. I'm liking the way you're laying it out there, because you're right. This is ultimately the pursuit of truth, and it's not your truth, my truth. It's the truth. You know what I mean? There is moral objective truth, which hadn't ought to be refuted. But we have this. When you talked about culture earlier, that's huge, because there's this schism that we have out there. There's this crack or chasm. I'm not sure how to describe it, but there doesn't seem to be common agreement now between what constitutes. Whoop! Wow! Did you say experience a lightning strike?
No.
Okay. Sorry, there was some crazy noise. It's okay. But there doesn't seem to be common agreement about what constitutes good and evil. You can talk to Joe Blow on the street or run into somebody at the movie theater, whatever else, and they may not agree on what's evil and what isn't. You know what I mean? And so I would like to see us trend back towards a common understanding of what that is. Doesn't mean that I have to like it, Zach. It doesn't mean that I have to like that definition, but I am duty bound to understand that. And we've moved so far from that. There's a return in our culture that's necessary in order for some of these things to work well. When you talked about the Socratic method, I have illustrated this to my kids, but I try and put them in positions where they can think their way into this rather than being told it. So if we have a statement, if this, then that, so be it. Then they understand that that's essentially the Socratic method. But when people offer this statement, I always tell them what one of my mentors, Jan Michelson, he's long since passed away now. He was on 1040 radio in the morning in Iowa for a couple decades. Fine gentleman, really enjoyed my time with him. Anyway, he would say, okay, Michael, that sounds right, but here's the problem. What has to be true of the first premises or precepts in order for this conclusion that you've been offered, almost always by the other side, or sometimes by your own. In order for this conclusion to hold water, what things have to be true about the supporting statements? And you start to reverse it. In order for this nonsense propaganda talking point that was thrown out in front of me, as if it had merit or value, nothing actually supports that, because if it did, the supports would look like this, and they're either not there or they're untrue. And we don't think like that as often as we had ought to. When you start doing that, you immediately have a finely tuned BS detector. You're like, wait a minute, that's wrong.
It is. And by the way, this is biblically, when we talk about seeking wisdom and discernment,
Mhm.
This is what you're talking about. And ultimately, you cannot be a proper leader if you don't have the ability to do what you're talking about,
Mhm.
because you'll be subject to the mob or subject to what people are saying, when rather what you should be doing is saying, okay, here's something that's being brought up to me. What are the lenses through which I look at that, and how do I evaluate that statement? And I used to tell my kids, most things cannot survive 3 whys. And but why are we doing this? Okay, we're doing it because this. Why are we doing that? And then you realize, I actually don't know why. Sometimes we just are doing things and we get in this this way of doing them. But one of the things that I like that Dr. Peterson talked about, when you're talking about this, it's important to remember that the purpose of this critical thinking is, as he would put it, to separate the wheat from the chaff, to understand what is the truth here. One of the things he would say is not the purpose, it's not to burn everything to the ground. When a lot of these leftist groups, what they're doing is trying to challenge the very institutions and structures of society that Western civilization was built on, and say that we can create our own. And that these were built over thousands of years, but we can create our own over a couple decades or 50 years that operate better. And we know we can't. And we know when that's been tried, it's led to the largest amount of human suffering ever known to mankind, which has resulted in the necessity for countries like ours to come up to kick off the chains of tyranny and say we are going to defend ourselves. And the way we do that is through critical thought and the First Amendment, right? If you don't have the First Amendment, you don't have the ability to think, because you can't speak about what you're thinking about. And if you can't speak about what you're thinking about, you can't debate it to find out what is actually true. This is what happens in communist countries. And so first we have to be able to speak and think, and then we have to be able to defend ourselves. And make sure that we can maintain that ability to speak and think. It's that foundational from a philosophical level, to where I'll just go back to this. The idea that some sort of second order consequence, like, if you're going to allow people to carry their legally, lawfully owned firearms in their vehicle to their workplace parking lot, if you're going to allow the ability that, well, maybe the insurance rate will go up, which I don't think is happening anyways. But if that could be something that you're evaluating that on, you don't understand the deep philosophical part of this. That the idea that that the financial aspect of this would trump the constitutionally protected aspect of this is just counter. I think about this on a cultural level. For a long time, the market fundamentalism has really taken over. This idea that whatever the market says is best, whatever the finances says is best. But remember, on the state level especially, we get to determine how we live as a people. And there are things that we put limits on to promote our culture. And, there's many of those things. In the federal government, that's what the Constitution actually is. It's a democracy restrained by our rights. And so, when I was first getting into this, I'll be quiet after this so we can keep talking, but when I was first getting into this in Colorado, I went up, I grew up in Northwest Iowa. I grew up in outside of a small town called Hinton, which is just north of Sioux City. I went to Sioux City East. I graduated from high school there. I went off to Fort Dodge, Iowa Central Community College, played football there first semester, and then I transferred out eventually to the University of Colorado Boulder. And I remember I was at a debate on healthcare when I was there. I was not a political person. I wasn't really thinking about politics that much. I was raised in a Christian conservative household. But there was a debate on healthcare, and I thought, I'll go to it. It was the governor of Colorado versus the state senator. I went to it, and I was like, this is amazing. It's like a contact sport for ideas, when they're really going after each other, and in a good way. It wasn't personal. It was all about the ideas, and they were really testing them against each other, which is what we have to do. And I said to the man, how do I get involved? And so I went down to the state capitol. I got an internship. The very first book I was given by somebody down there that was sort of political was called The Original Intent by David Barton. And it was a book about what did the founders mean when they wrote the Constitution? What was the intent of this idea of America? And when you start off with something like that and understand how deep this is and where it came from, even the ideas of the separation of powers, people don't realize that America was a startup. It really was.
Yeah.
And so many startups don't succeed. America did. And even the idea of the separation of powers, I think it was Montesquieu that was writing about this idea. It had hardly been tested anywhere. And then we put it in as our form of government. I think, like, how innovative is that? And so they were very intentional. The Second Amendment is not there by accident. The shall not be infringed is not there by accident. And the First Amendment is needed to make sure we can protect as well the rest of them, like the Second Amendment does.
Well, it's interesting to think about it that way, because the truth of the matter is, I have looked, I haven't had an exhaustive search, but the form of government that our founders, as you said, were toying with putting in place wasn't something that was tried and true. They weren't doing something that everybody else had done with success. Now, they had examples. They could point back to Rome and some other things like that. We're like, well, there are components present here and there were components present there. But they were saying to themselves, in theory, this ought to work. And in theory, it can work, provided some of these things are done and done exhaustively, but, oh, by the way, this is going to be perilous. It's going to be hard, and freedom, like it or not, freedom is going to be messy, because we're going to have choices that are freedom of rather than freedom from. And I haven't seen it said like that, but I wonder if some of these guys are saying to themselves, if we can keep everybody understanding that the freedom of making these choices is still bound like a chain to the consequences of our choices, then inherently we're likely to make better choices, and this can work. Yes. If this gets bastardized into freedom from consequence, which is where we see culture going now, so we're not bound to the consequence, this will immediately go in the ditch. We will be face down in the gutter quickly. Yeah. And that's where we're at. There's a divergence in what people understand freedom is and isn't. It's absolutely bound to responsibility, and we are running from that.
Yes, that we could talk about this for a long time. My dad is a second career pastor, and he would always talk to me about this idea of idolatrous freedom. Mm-hmm. The idea that actually, that it's all about this right or that right, that, by the way, are not instantiating the Constitution, that they're, they're made by man in idea rather than natural rights given by God and Creator. And so he would talk to me about these things. I remember, gosh, it must have been 2008, somewhere when Barack Obama was president. He talked about the Constitution as a document of, quote, negative liberties. He said, it says what the government can't do to you, but not what it must do for you. And I'm thinking, well, that's the idea, because the government isn't here to do these things for you. It's here to make sure it protects your rights. And then you are here to form, bonds with your neighbors in your state, etc., to do the things for yourself and your neighbors that need to be done. And so I always thought that was a very interesting sort of way to think about it. But he actually led us into his mind for a minute to say that, the Constitution is not a good document because all it's doing is protecting us from government, which, by the way, that's what, the Bill of Rights, all of these things were set up to do, to say, we are not going to allow the government to do what it's done in every single society ever known to mankind. Yeah. We are going to protect you from it.
We've seen a string of anti-liberty people or anti-liberty ideas trotted out there as if they were somehow virtuous. And then they get up in front of their pulpits and, Barack Obama's a good example. You didn't do that. You didn't build that. Well, wrong. You got Biden running around there. Buy a shotgun. Just buy a shotgun. Just saying silly stuff. And we almost had a president who kept saying something, and I'm not picking on Democrats, I'm picking on flawed ideology, who would stand up there and say, we must be unburdened by what has been, and people are like, what does that even mean? And the first time I heard it, I looked at my wife and she's like, what? And I said, you heard it. You know exactly what it means. She's like, no, I don't. I'm like, yes, you do. She just said, I absolutely don't want to be burdened with any kind of responsibility or consequence for anything that's happened. And so my life would be exponentially easier if I could shrug my shoulders and say, whoopsies,
Yeah, not my problem.
You don't want those people. You don't want those people in positions of leadership, and you certainly don't want those people in positions of placing policy upon you as if it had merit or value. I mean, that is a really lousy idea. You want people who are listening and saying, "Well, okay, hold on here a minute." Like you said, the whys. Is this going to work? What happens if it doesn't? What things led us to believe that this was necessary to begin with?
Yeah, exactly. Why are we doing this in the first place? Right. I remember Elon Musk had some sort of quote like that. It's like, it's the biggest waste of time to make something more, to allow yourself to do something more efficient that you shouldn't be doing in the first place. Like, it just doesn't make sense. But let me just say this, there is a big battle going on here because, in my race alone, and like, I know you're not getting political. I'll talk a little bit about it. My opponent is not being honest about who he is. Like, he has called for gun control on his own social media platform, said, quote, I like my gun control. And, or whether it's, on the life issue, just recently said, life begins at breath. That is a radical statement, an absolutely radical statement. And so, but what's happening is you'll have these people running for office. And this is why I said earlier, it's about truth. And part of debate and discussion, why I've called for long-form Lincoln Douglas style debates, is because this is how you separate the wheat from the chaff. This is how you force people into answering. And by the way, I will have to answer for things too that they want me to answer for. I just believe that as the truth comes out, authenticity will come out, genuineness will come out, and you'll see where people stand and where their hearts are. Because when you're asked a question about, being pro-life or pro-choice, and your answer is that life begins at breath, that's a radical statement. That's a radical statement for anybody but the most radical left, because we are a country that does protect life. And the idea that it doesn't begin until you're born is very radical, even on the side of the people who are pro-choice. So it's good to make sure we're getting these ideas out, that we are testing them against each other, getting to the truth. And that's what debate, discussion, the First Amendment is all about. We have to have the ability to think. But I want to say one more thing. Just, you mentioned earlier something that when we're talking about this good versus evil and how we can't agree sometimes even on what good is, I will tell you that I mentioned this in a talk, and it happened in 2019. I had a thought on this. I was watching that 75th anniversary of D-Day. I've talked a little bit about this. And I remember being in my office and getting tears in my eyes watching these guys and the videos of these guys going and having those boat backs fall down and them just running out into the water but just getting taken out by bullet after bullet. But they kept marching, and they just didn't stop. And I had never sat and contemplated that until that day when President Trump was on the stage with those men who had actually done it. And what was so interesting to me about it is, like, in my mind, the connection I made to that was that it was a very close glimpse. It was a glimpse of the sacrifice that Christ made as he put his cross on his back, walked up the hill to his known impending demise or death on earth. In that sense, obviously he rose again. But what got me as I thought about this is, most people don't understand why that is good. It's because it's a reflection of the ultimate good. But here's the thing, though. Almost everybody, when they see, hear, or watch that and understand what those men did, think, wow, that was something amazing. That was a sacrifice that was just unbelievable. We have these glimpses where the collective understands good. And I would say on the other side, understands evil. Part of our job is to help them understand, where is that coming from? Because when you find that, we actually have a connection point with each other to say, that is a universally known, sacrificially good thing that happened. And that's when we get that glimpse, it's so important to think that through and actually understand why. Because people do recognize good, but it is being taken away in a large part to say that, there are things that are coming up in society that people are being fooled into thinking are acceptable. Reading a book about transgenderism to kids in school. It's just not acceptable. It's not something we do with children. The oldest ideas should be taught to the youngest of kids, not the 15-minute-old ideas. Anyway, sorry.
No, you're right. When we move from, I guess you'd call it selfishness to selflessness, all kinds of things improve for ourselves and around us. Because when we're self-oriented, I'm important. I want things for me. Well, that's okay. I don't think that that's wrong, but I think that there's a lot of peril associated with making that the primary positions in one's life. When you talk about these people and the door coming down, and then absolutely be flooded with bullets, almost as if they were raindrops. It tugs at my heartstrings pretty hard. You're like, and to push forward over and over and over, and waves of people being mowed down in unbelievable types of carnage. I mean, you couldn't even see that in a packing plant. You know what I mean? I mean, it's that ugly. And for them to keep going, knowing here's where I forfeit, but maybe the guy behind me makes it a foot farther than I do. You know what I mean?
Bingo.
It's unbelievable to think like that. And when we put ourselves in positions to say, you're more important than I am, I want you to move forward. That's how I think that we move forward. That's how marriages stay together. When somebody looks at the other one and say, I love what you want, I love what you need, I love you more than I love myself, and I'm going to place you ahead of myself. The next thing you know, that person is offering you that back in reciprocity, and you're able to weather all kinds of storms that you are probably not prepared for, no matter what you may think. We talked about it just for a second when you and I popped on before we started recording. Life will crush you. It'll give you the real beat down. So the question isn't whether you'll get crushed or not. You will, maybe multiple times. You've talked about cancer and the things associated with living in Iowa. We all know somebody who's been affected by this directly or ourselves. Yeah. So can we move forward through this, and how do we handle what's put in front of us? That's chief among the ways that we live and the way that we raise our kids, who we associate with, who we want in positions of leadership over and around us, who we want advocating for us. All those things matter supremely. So it's a governor's race is a monumental choice. We've got to get this choice made wisely. So I apologize. We're running low on time. I wanted to be able to talk with you for 4 or 10 hours, whatever it took, but we've only got a little bit of time. So I want to do this. I want to ask one question, and I'd like for you to wrap things up, if you're okay with that. Here's what I had written down that I wanted to talk about, and you may have covered this properly. I'm not sure. That's up to you. But what question do you wish people would be asking you? I mean, you're talking with a lot of people. You're talking with people who run massive corporations, right down to guys who are, they were city employees, brooming the streets from time to time. I mean, there's every manner of life that you've experienced in your campaign. You're going to keep on. So what's a question that you wish people would ask you?
I think, let me just say this. The day after the primary, we won the primary, and then the next day we were out here at the farm, and I went on a walk with my wife. And I had a lot on my mind. We were out in the field there, and she could tell. And she asked me, what's on your mind? And I just said, I actually think my life would be better if I wasn't running for office. I believe that. But I have this also a much truer belief that my grandkids' lives will be better if I do. Maybe that's idealistic. But I think I can make a real difference for the long term. And so the question I hope people would ask me and my opponent is a deep and probing, why are you doing this? What do you want from this? Where do you want to go with this? Because I have no desire to run for any other office ever. I have no desire to be in another elected position or be appointed to anything. I would commit to saying I'm not going to. My goal is to make life better for my grandkids and yours. And I believe that this is the best way that I can do it. And I believe the people of Iowa, the Republican Party of Iowa, put their trust in me. And so I think at the most foundational level, getting to the why of why I'm doing it, so I can answer and talk about things that are not even political in nature, I think is very important. So that's probably, I'm asked a lot about every topic from firearms to conservation to farming and agriculture. But if you get to the why, and it gets ultimately to the culture and to the same story of Hans, who went off to fight for something that he didn't have to do, then you'll understand that this is about a way of life. It's not about getting a political power. And matter of fact, sometimes the most annoying things for me to have to deal with are understanding the politics within the politics of just saying, look, I'm an outsider. I've never been involved in the drama of all of that. And so sometimes I find myself in the middle of it. Frankly, I don't really care, because I'm just thinking, I'm here to act on principle. What is the right thing to do? But if you get down to the why, it's very important. And what some people don't like that though, Michael, and I'll tell you why. Because they realize you can't be bought or you can't be controlled. That I have a set of principles that I've been taught throughout my life, that have built me, that I'm trying to teach my kids, that I'm not going to violate. I just will not do it. I'm not going to answer to the mob. I'm not going to be pressured or terrorized into taking a stance I don't believe in. I believe in private property rights. I believe in the Second Amendment. I believe in free speech. I believe in these ideals. And I also believe in the 10th Amendment, that we get to do things differently if we like. But if somebody asks me the why, they'll get to that. And I hope more people would ask me that.
Fantastic. All right. Well, you've been generous with your time. Thank you. I'm glad that you were able to visit with us today. If you'd like to come back, or there are follow-ups to this or whatever else, you let us know and we'll get you on and we'll visit with you anytime. You may have things that come up on the campaign trail and whatever they be, current events that need to go out there. We run little tiny snippets called IFC specials. Give us a ring. We'll make it work on the fly. That's fine. Zach Lahn, running for governor of Iowa, ZACHLAHN. Check out his site, integrate, learn what he's about, listen to this podcast, share it with others. The way that this works is when we have these heartfelt conversations where we're genuine with one another, that they're distributed so that people know and understand. It's the only way that this works. I was glad to see you on Sean Ryan's podcast and see you in some of these other places. You got an opportunity to have long-form conversations and really tell people who you were. And I got news for you. People who are phony don't make it very far on Sean Ryan's show. They don't withstand that kind of criticism and that scrutiny. So kudos to you. I'm tickled. Again, thank you for your time this morning. Is there anything else we need to say before we go?
Well, I've really enjoyed the way you have these conversations. I'm thankful. And if you and I want to sometime sit in front of a whiteboard with an equation we can't figure out and try to do it, it'd be a lot of fun.
I don't know what kind of time we're going to need to budget for that, as I said. That's not my forte, but we'll have some good conversation doing it. We've had it this morning. Thank you, sir. Take care.
Thank you, Michael.